for generations, really. If you had to pick one word to sum up the whole spirit of global economics.
It was progress.
It was progress, exactly. Capitalism was this engine.
Right.
And it was completely synonymous with innovation, with opportunity.
With this really powerful, deeply comforting idea that a rising tide would lift all economic boats.
Yes.
It was more than just an economic system. It was, an implicit contract. The belief was absolutely foundational for billions of people.
A contract that said what, exactly?
That if you worked hard, if you played by the rules and participated in good faith, the system would, in turn, reward you.
With security.
With security, with opportunity, and a reliable path to a better life for you and your family. That belief, it held entire societies together.
But today, that promise feels, profoundly fractured. And we're not just talking about a normal dip in the market.
No, this isn't a cyclical downturn, something that just happens every 8 or 10 years.
Right. What we're examining here is this palpable systemic shift, where that once bright outlook just feels so distant. It's been overshadowed by this pervasive sense of anxiety, of real structural uncertainty.
And for a huge part of the global population, that engine of prosperity you mentioned, it feels like it's sputtering.
It really does. It's leaving so many people just questioning their future, their place within the very system that was supposed to empower them.
And this disillusionment, this is the critical part. It isn't just a mood. It's not cultural pessimism.
No.
It's a direct, I would argue, rational response to observable economic realities. The analysis we're looking at today suggests that the 2008 financial crisis wasn't just another bad recession.
It was more than that.
It was the definitive terminal end of an economic era, the end of what we're calling Capitalism 3.0. That entire system, with all its assumptions and policies, it finally broke.
So our mission in this deep dive is to look past all the small fixes, the minor policy tweaks, and move toward what the sources are calling a profound reevaluation of our economic foundations.
We have to.
We need to understand the data, the psychology behind this, and the measurable realities that are driving this fracture. And then, and this is the important part, we need to look around the globe for blueprints, for a path toward the next phase. Capitalism 4.0.
We need to figure out what that new contract might even look like.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's see why so many people feel that the rules of the game have fundamentally changed. So let's start with the symptoms. The things people are actually seeing and feeling. The observable realities fueling all this anxiety are, well, they're pretty stark.
Yeah, they are.
When you look past the glossy corporate reports and you look at the data that's actually filtering down to the middle and working classes, the picture that emerges is what the sources call an ossified version of capitalism.
That phrase, ossified capitalism, I think it's so powerful. It suggests stiffness, rigidity, not necessarily outright failure, but a dangerous lack of movement. It's stuck. It's not that the idea of competitive markets is broken, but that our current version feels rigidly locked into a model that it disproportionately rewards being big and being there first. Incumbency.
And the core issue, the thing that's really causing the breakdown, is trust.
It's the absolute breakdown of trust. That social bargain we just talked about, it feels like it's been unilaterally rewritten by powerful, concentrated interests.
And what we're seeing are, four major interconnected symptoms of this rewrite, the things that are directly fueling anxiety?
Yes. 4 big ones.
Okay, let's take the first one. This undeniable concentration of both economic and political power. We're not just talking about wealth here, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's not just about who has the most money. It's about who has the power to actually shape the markets and, crucially, to shape policy itself.
And what is the foundational impact of that concentration? Why does it matter so much?
Well, the impact is, it's corrosive. It's foundational to everything else we're going to discuss. When you get capital and control concentrating into the hands of just a few dominant players,
like big tech and big finance.
Exactly. Big tech with their massive network effects and big finance with their sheer scale, it fundamentally changes the entire competitive landscape.
How so?
Well, these entities gain this unprecedented power to dictate market trends, to set prices, and maybe most alarmingly, to just stifle new competition. They can acquire potential disruptors before they ever become a real threat.
So for you, the listener, what does that actually mean?
It means the very engine of capitalism, which relies on new companies challenging the old guard, is slowing down. You have fewer choices, you have less genuine innovation outside of those few concentrated areas, and you have a system where the barriers to entry for the next generation of entrepreneurs, they become almost insurmountable.
So it's not just that they're accumulating wealth, they're actually controlling the flow of innovation itself.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yep.
When you have fewer players, they have much less incentive to innovate aggressively. There's no existential threat pushing them.
They can just get comfortable.
Exactly. It slows down that whole cycle of creative destruction that's supposed to keep capitalism dynamic and efficient. It allows the established players to just protect their margins instead of constantly trying to invent the next big thing or lower cost for consumers.
Okay, the second symptom. This one is maybe the most emotionally powerful one. The recurring spectacle of massive government bailouts.
Oh, yes.
These are policies that just feel like they're designed to reward failure on this huge national scale. Why does that hit such a raw nerve with people, even all these years later?
Because it's the ultimate, most visible signal of systemic hypocrisy. It screams that we have a two-tiered system of justice.
Right.
The public watched as these huge, complex financial institutions took on enormous, highly leveraged risks. And then, when those bets went bad, those same institutions were rescued with vast sums of taxpayer money.
Sometimes from the very same taxpayers who had just lost their jobs or their homes because of those risks.
Precisely. It sends this unmistakable message. There is one set of rules for the connected and the powerful, where failure is cushioned by the state, and the consequences are just deflected.
And then there's another set of rules for everyone else.
For the rest of society, yes.
Yeah.
For the individual worker or the small business owner. For them, failure is absolute. It often means personal ruin, bankruptcy.
And that distinction, that failure is absorbed by the public for the big guys, but it's borne entirely by the individual for the little guys, that creates a deep, deep sense of moral betrayal.
It absolutely does. That perceived betrayal is what destroys public faith more effectively than any complex economic theory ever could. People understand intuitively that a system should enforce accountability.
Of course.
And when it visibly and repeatedly fails to do that for the biggest players, it just confirms the suspicion that the whole system is fundamentally rigged.
Okay, so now we get to where the data gets really weird. The third symptom, the productivity puzzle.
Yes, this is a fascinating one.
We live in an age of what the sources call unprecedented technological advancements. We have AI that can write its own code. We have advanced robotics, instant global communication.
Ubiquitous connectivity?
Yeah. If you brought a time traveler here from, say, the 1990s and showed them our technology, they'd assume we were all working, 10 hours a week and swimming in wealth.
They would. But the data says otherwise.
Yet productivity growth is stubbornly sluggish in most developed economies. Why this massive disconnect?
This paradox is profound, and I think it's critical to solving what Capitalism 4.0 needs to be. Historically, big technological leaps, like the steam engine or electricity, or even the mass adoption of the internet, they translated pretty quickly into broad-based economic gains.
Right. Rising living standards, more efficiency everywhere.
Exactly. The fact that our current leaps in digital tech are not diffusing into those kinds of broad productivity gains suggests there's a structural blockage somewhere.
Like a kink in the hose.
That's a great analogy. We'll get into the narrow capture theory in a bit, but the symptom itself is that the engine is there, but the transmission system is failing. The tech exists, but our economic structure is preventing it from spreading out and being applied productively across the whole economy.
So we're innovating like crazy, but we're not translating that innovation into better, more efficient lives for most people.
Precisely. The gains are all being concentrated, which means the overall macroeconomic data looks stagnant, even while specific sectors are absolutely booming.
And that leads us right into the fourth reality, the one that probably drives the deepest, most personal anxiety. And that's the elusive dream of genuine economic mobility. The sources are pretty clear that the effort to reward ratio has just deteriorated, that improving your economic standing feels more and more unattainable for a lot of people.
And this failure of mobility, you could argue it's the ultimate failure of that implicit contract we started with.
Because that's the whole sales pitch.
That's the whole pitch. Capitalism sells itself as an opportunity machine, a meritocracy where hard work leads to advancement. If you can't climb that economic ladder, or if the ladder itself feels like it's being pulled up after you, the system stops feeling like an opportunity.
And it starts feeling like an inherited structure, like a class system.
Exactly. When you have that concentration of power and a regulatory environment that favors the established players, the incumbents, it makes upward mobility a much steeper, sometimes impossible climb for new entrepreneurs and for workers who are just looking for rising real wages.
It's a clear sign.
It's a sign that the fundamental mechanisms that once linked effort to reward are broken. And that leads directly to the widespread social instability and anxiety that we're seeing all around us today. So to really understand how we got here, to this fractured promise, we have to put the present moment in context. We have to recognize that capitalism has never been this single fixed thing. It's not a monolithic ideology.
It's always changing.
It's dynamic, it's complex, it's often messy. It's a system that has continuously reinvented itself, usually in response to major crises and technological shifts.
So when we talk about trying to find a capitalism 4.0, we're really just acknowledging that we've already been through several other versions.
Exactly. We've gone through distinct evolutionary phases already, and they were often driven by massive, massive failures.
And those failures forced a real recalibration, right? A philosophical and a policy shift. Can you maybe walk us through those historical phases?
Certainly. So we can start with phase one, laissez-faire. This was the original model, stretching from the Industrial Revolution all the way into the early 20th century.
Hands off.
Completely hands-off. A maximalist approach. Minimal government intervention. The whole intellectual foundation was championing the power of pure, unregulated free markets. It was all about individual enterprise, supply-side economics.
And the belief was the invisible hand would sort it all out.
It was almost a religious belief, yes, that the invisible hand was sufficient to guide the economy to the best, most equitable outcomes. The state was just supposed to be a night watchman, basically, just there to protect property rights.
But that system, it spectacularly failed to prevent extreme instability. It all culminated in the absolute devastation of the Great Depression.
It did. And that shock, that trauma, is what forced the first major pivot.
To phase two.
Correct. That devastation necessitated the creation of phase two, Keynesianism. This was a profound conceptual break from that laissez-faire dogma.
So instead of minimal intervention,
it advocated for active government management of aggregate demand. The entire goal was stabilization. Government intervention through public spending, fiscal policy, what we now call stimulus, was seen as a tool to mitigate the severity of downturns and ensure full employment.
And this phase, especially after World War II, dramatically ramped up the role of the state, right? Creating social safety nets, that sort of thing.
It did. It cushioned citizens against market failures in a way that had never been done before.
And this Keynesian model, which was underpinned by things like the Bretton Woods Agreement, it really dominated the economic landscape for decades. But it wasn't perfect. It had its own crises, specifically that brutal stagflation in the 1970s.
That's right. That toxic combination of high inflation and slow growth. It provided the intellectual opening for the third great shift.
Which leads us to phase three, the Reagan-Thatcher pivot in the late 20th century.
A profound return toward market fundamentalism, but this time in a globalized system. It emphasized aggressive deregulation, massive privatization of state-owned assets, and a really strong de-emphasis on state control.
The thinking shifted back.
It shifted back hard. The consensus became that government intervention was itself inefficient, that it was often the root of the problem, leading to things like excessive debt and bureaucracy.
And this is the era, this is the model that laid the structural foundations for what would eventually fail us in 2008. The sources call this period, this post-war globalized consensus, Capitalism 3.0.
That's right.
What were the specific characteristics of Capitalism 3.0 beyond just the political philosophy?
Well, Capitalism 3.0 was really defined by three key structural elements, especially in its later years. First, you have accelerated globalization, the rapid movement of capital and goods across borders, always seeking efficiency, often without much regard for the local costs.
Okay.
Second was financialization. This is the dramatic growth and the incredible complexity of the financial sector compared to the real productive economy. Finance became the dominant way to make profit.
And the third?
And third, and this is most important for our discussion, was a deep underlying belief in broadly shared prosperity.
The rising tide.
The rising tide. The consensus was that growth, driven mostly by innovation and, financial ingenuity, would just naturally lead to benefits that were shared across the board.
So the belief wasn't just that the economy would get bigger, but that the system itself would reward ingenuity and hard work. And that would create this sense of forward momentum, of optimism.
Precisely. And for a while, in its functioning phase, the mechanisms of Capitalism 3.0 did seem to deliver more tangible benefits across a wider slice of society than, say, laissez-faire ever had. Even with that policy shift toward deregulation, the momentum from the post-war boom and all the new tech kept that belief structure alive.
The rules felt stable.
They felt stable, and they felt like they were applied consistently
Yeah.
until 2008. That event wasn't just a painful recession, it was the final irreversible shattering of that optimistic outlook. It was the psychological end of the entire 3.0 era.
Okay, let's really zero in on that definitive moment. The 2008 financial crisis, we've established it was a brutal interrogation of that whole Capitalism 3.0 model.
It was.
When you look at the sources, what made this crisis qualitatively different from other really severe downturns, like the recessions in the early 90s or the early 2000s?
The difference was the sheer magnitude of the systemic risk. Past downturns were often, cyclical, or there were corrections in a specific sector. 2008 exposed these deep-seated systemic fragilities that had been building up for decades.
Through all that deregulation and globalization.
Yes. The crisis wasn't about a failure in just one market. It was about the profound, tangled interconnectedness of global financial institutions that had just grown too large and too complex to be allowed to fail.
Because if they did,
it would have destroyed the entire global economy.
which brings us right back to that stark reality of too big to fail. How did that go from being like a theoretical economic warning to this really unsettling reality?
It signaled that certain financial institutions had become so massive and so deeply intertwined through these really opaque instruments.
Things like CDOs and credit default swaps.
Exactly, things most people had never even heard of. They were so intertwined that their instantaneous collapse threatened to just dismantle the entire global financial system. The consequences weren't just recessionary, they were existential.
What does that mean, existential?
It means risking a complete freeze in credit markets. And credit is the absolute lifeblood of modern commerce. So when central banks and governments stepped in, they argued, and they were probably correct, that they weren't doing it to save the executives or the shareholders.
They were doing it to prevent a total meltdown.
A complete civilizational economic meltdown.
But the necessity of those bailouts, even if it was logically sound from a policymaker's perspective, it immediately created this huge, enduring public perception problem.
Massive.
This widespread resentment has become what the sources call a lingering scar on public faith.
And that resentment, it stemmed directly from the institutional behavior that happened before the crisis. These institutions were seen, and in many cases it was documented, as engaging in just extraordinary reckless risk-taking.
All while benefiting from policies that allowed for maximum leverage and minimal oversight.
Right. So when the bill finally came due, they didn't pay it. The public did. And this created that powerful phenomenon we call moral hazard.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. Not the textbook definition, but what are the consequences of moral hazard?
Fundamentally, moral hazard is a distortion of accountability. That's the simplest way to put it.
Okay.
In a healthy market, if a company takes reckless risks and it fails, it has to bear the full, sharp consequences. Bankruptcy, dissolution, it exits the market. That mechanism, the threat of failure, is what enforces prudent behavior.
But when a company is deemed too big to fail,
the government steps in as this implicit guarantor. And what that does is it effectively signals to the leadership of those mega institutions that failure on a massive scale will be cushioned by the state using public money.
So the perverse lesson these huge institutions learned was that they could effectively privatize all the massive profits when things were good.
Right.
But they could socialize the catastrophic risks and losses when things went bad.
Exactly. That is the absolute core of the public anger. The sources highlight this sharp, undeniable contrast. For the average person who lost their home to foreclosure, or the small business that relied on credit lines that just vanished overnight, failure meant immediate total ruin.
They bore the full consequence.
The full, sharp consequences of the market correction. And yet, the same system protected the massive entities that created the crisis in the first place. This inherent inequity, this strong, visceral feeling that the rules are applied completely differently for the powerful, that's what shattered the implicit contract of fairness.
So it wasn't just an economic correction, it was a profound moral trauma that undermined the basic idea of meritocracy.
Absolutely. The system appeared to protect its own, above all else. And that betrayal created this long-term political fracture that, I would argue, continues to fuel populism and anti-establishment sentiment to this day. The scar is deep because it suggests the game is rigged not by some external force, but by the very structures and policies designed to govern the economy. And no amount of slow recovery or GDP growth can easily repair that fundamental psychological break in trust.
Okay, so if the 2008 crisis was the moment the curtain was pulled back, the lingering structural issues are what continue to hold the system back today.
That's right.
Let's dive deeper into these core current problems, that productivity puzzle and the increasing, really alarming concentration of power.
This takes us right back to that perplexing question we touched on earlier. Why, in an era of genuine technological abundance AI, advanced robotics, sophisticated computing, is productivity growth so stubbornly sluggish across the developed world?
Because it makes no sense.
It makes no sense. Economists really expected these technologies to generate a massive transformative waves of efficiency, similar to what the electric motor did a century ago, but that just hasn't materialized on a broad scale.
And the sources point to a specific theory to explain this profound disconnect, the narrow capture theory.
Yes.
This is where those structural problems we talked about become these active mechanisms of economic failure.
It is. The narrow capture theory basically posits that the economic benefits of all this incredible innovation, the efficiency gains, the new markets, the bigger margins, they're being captured and really hoarded within a very narrow band of already dominant corporations and wealthy individuals.
So spreading out.
Instead of diffusing across the entire economy. And look at big tech. They create astronomical value, but often with relatively small, very highly compensated employee bases compared to, say, the industrial giants of the 20th century. Their scale lets them optimize and extract value, but that extraction doesn't necessarily create widespread, well-paid jobs or significantly boost productivity for the rest of the economy.
For struggling sectors like construction or education or healthcare.
Exactly.
So the innovative energy is high, but the economic rewards are all getting stuck at the very top. How do they actually achieve this narrow capture?
There are a few key mechanisms. First is what you could call intellectual property, IP hoarding. Dominant firms are incredibly aggressive about patenting and protecting their discoveries, which makes it very difficult for smaller companies to license or build upon those foundational technologies.
Okay, what's the second one?
The second is strategic acquisition. Big tech, in particular, uses its vast amounts of capital to acquire promising new competitors very early on. Economists sometimes call these killer acquisitions.
And that does what? It just removes them from the board.
It immediately removes potential disruptive forces from the market, which ensures the incumbent's dominance remains unchallenged.
So if some brilliant young entrepreneur develops a truly disruptive idea, the goal of the big corporation isn't to compete with it, it's just to buy it. And maybe even shelve it if it threatens their core business model.
Precisely. It's a very effective strategy for maintaining market share. But it is catastrophic for systemic dynamism and for overall productivity growth. Their sheer scale creates these formidable barriers to entry for smaller players.
And when potential competitors can't even get a foothold,
Then genuine competition is stifled. And the dominant players have less incentive to keep innovating aggressively, which feeds directly back into that productivity stagnation we see in the macroeconomic data.
and this mechanism, this capture, it's directly tied to the alarming political influence these concentrated entities have.
Absolutely. This concentration is made much worse by what's often called regulatory capture. The sources specifically name the revolving door between government and industry as a central failure mechanism that entrenches the dominance of these established players.
Okay, let's explain what that revolving door looks like in practical terms for the listener. How does it actually affect policy?
So imagine a high-level government official, a key regulator, maybe a chief legal counsel, or a congressional staffer who literally drafted the legislation overseeing, say, the banking industry.
Right.
As soon as they leave government service, they immediately take a lucrative multi-million-dollar position at the very institution they were just overseeing. That's the revolving door.
And it creates a powerful, maybe unspoken alignment of interests.
That's the key. It means that while that person is in office, they know that their future earning potential depends heavily on maintaining a good relationship with the industry they're regulating.
So they might pull their punches.
It can lead to the drafting or enforcement of policies that aren't aggressively competitive, but are instead policies that subtly favor the scale and the long-term stability of the big established players over the disruptive, risk-taking behavior of new companies trying to enter the market. The system actually rewards policies that protect incumbents.
So instead of policies that encourage a level playing field, we end up with policies that entrench the dominance of established players, which makes upward mobility a steeper climb because the whole system is structurally tilted against disruption.
That is the crucial summary. Addressing this profound imbalance of concentrated economic and political power isn't just a matter of social fairness. It is an economic imperative. It is an absolute prerequisite for capitalism 4.0 to regain its dynamism and achieve the kind of productivity growth that translates into broad benefits for everyone.
So we need structural change.
We need structural change, not just behavioral modification. Unless we break down those mechanisms of concentration and open up the markets to genuine competition, the promise of capitalism will just continue to feel deeply, deeply fractured.
So given these deep structural flaws we've been talking about, the moral hazard, the narrow capture, the regulatory entrenchment, the path forward, well, it can't be found by just clinging to outdated or rigid ideologies.
We can't just do more of the same. We can't. The analysis strongly suggests that the next phase, Capitalism 4.0, it's not going to be a single universal blueprint that you can apply everywhere. It's much more likely to be a diverse family of context-specific, resilient systems.
Systems that are tailored to the unique economic, social, and political histories of different nations.
Exactly. That emphasis on adaptability is crucial.
And the sources give us some specific international case studies, examples of successful, competitive, and more inclusive market economies that seem to have avoided the worst parts of that ossified 3.0 model. Let's start with a really compelling one. Switzerland, a model of stability and high productivity.
Switzerland offers a powerful insight into how a nation can successfully balance being extremely competitive with having profound social stability. Their success really rests on several specific pillars. First, they pursue deep specialization in high-value industries.
So they don't try to do everything.
Not at all. They focus relentlessly on areas like precision engineering, pharmaceuticals, wealth management, high-end services. They recognized decades ago they couldn't compete on scale with the US or China, so they decided to compete on quality, expertise, and niche leadership.
So no competing on volume. It's all about proprietary knowledge and being the global leader in very specific high-margin sectors.
That's it. But, and this is crucial, that specialization is coupled with two other stabilizing factors. First, a very robust social safety net. This means citizens feel strongly buffered against severe economic shocks like getting sick or losing a job.
Which encourages people to take risks, right? Like starting a business.
Exactly. And the third factor is their pragmatic, deeply decentralized governance structure.
Now, how does decentralized governance help the economy? That seems a little counterintuitive to a lot of the centralized models we see.
Well, decentralization, where a lot of the political and fiscal power actually rests with the cantons, the regions, and local communities, it acts as this powerful risk management tool. Economic policy failures tend to be localized, which makes them easier to correct. It prevents a single national blunder from sinking the entire economy.
And it fosters local competition, I imagine.
It does, for investment and for efficiency. This combination results in a market economy that is both fiercely competitive on the world stage and deeply inclusive at home, because the local policies are highly responsive to regional labor and capital needs. They manage economic risk by spreading it out geographically.
Okay, our second case study, Taiwan, is an example of effective strategic government intervention, a concept that's often treated like heresy in pure free market thinking.
Taiwan is a definitive masterclass in how to manage the relationship between the state and the market. They have masterfully leveraged what's called strategic industrial policy.
And this isn't the old Soviet-style command and control economy.
Not at all. It's a focused, enabling long-term national strategy. It's aimed at identifying and nurturing key industries, most famously semiconductors and advanced manufacturing.
So what does that strategic industrial policy look like on the ground in Taiwan? What are they actually doing?
It involves things like state-directed investment in R&D, creating science parks and educational institutions that are aligned with these strategic technologies, and providing targeted, time-limited incentives for private companies to innovate in these critical sectors.
So the government is acting more like a venture capital partner.
A partner and an intelligence gathering agency, yes, setting the general direction. This relentless focus on technological advancement, on achieving global superiority in key sectors, it just shows how the state can proactively nurture national champions and promote national resilience without succumbing to cronyism.
Because the goals are transparent and tied to global performance?
Exactly. It proves that government can be an essential partner in defining and enabling strategic competitive advantages, especially in these really fast-moving, capital-intensive sectors. Success isn't left purely to chance, it is strategically cultivated.
A nuanced relationship. And finally, a very different model from a rapidly developing economy, Vietnam. Their story is all about adaptation.
Vietnam showcases the immense power of adaptive growth and continuous market integration. Their journey highlights a rapid transition from a centrally planned economy to a market-oriented one, which resulted in enormous economic growth and really effective integration into global supply chains.
They didn't just pick one ideology and stick with it.
No, they've consistently used adaptive market reforms to maximize their opportunities within the global economy, particularly by building up significant manufacturing prowess in things like textiles, electronics, and assembly.
And the most important metric of their success there has to be the sheer scale of poverty reduction.
Precisely. They have managed to lift massive portions of their population out of poverty through this continuous pragmatic reform process. The lesson from them for established economies is flexibility. They avoided ideological rigidity and constantly tailored their market structure to their specific context and global trading opportunities. Their success really underscores this idea that Capitalism 4.0 has to be context-specific.
Okay, so if we pull these models together, Switzerland's stability, Taiwan's strategic focus, Vietnam's adaptability, what are the common threads? What defines the spirit of Capitalism 4.0?
I think there are four consistent, non-negotiable traits that emerge from these successes. First is remarkable adaptability, a real commitment to avoiding ideological rigidity, choosing pragmatic, evidence-based policy over some entrenched dogma.
Makes sense.
Second, a clear focus on competitive advantages, strategic specialization, strategic policy, moving beyond just letting the invisible hand decide everything and actively deciding where a nation can and should lead.
And third,
A heavy foundational investment in human capital and education, recognizing that your people, their skills, their knowledge, that is your greatest asset. It's the only sustainable source of long-term productivity growth. And that investment has to be continuous from early school all the way through professional retraining.
and the final thread, it brings us back to that key relationship we've been discussing, the one that 3.0 really failed to manage.
It's the nuanced state-market relationship. In all these successful models, the government is neither hostile to markets nor is it absent. It acts as an enabler, a strategic partner, and crucially, as an aggressive regulator focused on fostering genuine competition and systemic stability. The state has to actively manage the concentration of power to ensure that markets stay competitive, dynamic, and open to new entrants. That is the fundamental difference between the failed 3.0 model and the resilient 4.0 blueprint.
So the challenge, then, for established, often ideologically rigid economies is adopting these principles. It requires questioning these long-held assumptions, like the inherent virtue of total deregulation and actively managing that concentration of power we talked about. Capitalism 4.0 demands innovation not just in our technology, but in our socioeconomic structures themselves. We have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. Our journey started with this acknowledgement that the core promise of capitalism, that rising tide, is fractured.
It is.
And that fracture is due to this toxic combination of power concentration, the inequities that were just laid bare by the massive bailouts, and this frustrating productivity puzzle that just doesn't line up with our technological potential.
And critically, we established that the 2008 financial crisis wasn't some temporary blip. It was the definitive signal that the era of capitalism 3.0, defined by unchecked financialization and that flawed promise of shared prosperity, was well and truly over.
That crisis exposed deep systemic flaws.
Particularly that moral hazard, which has completely undermined public faith in the system's fairness.
The conclusion here seems pretty compelling. The current path, which is defined by narrow capture and entrenched incumbency, is simply unsustainable for a huge portion of the global population.
It is. The dream of upward mobility and a secure future is increasingly out of reach for so many. And that is what fuels social and economic instability all over the world.
And this is precisely why the search for Capitalism 4.0 is so essential, so urgent.
It is, and it is emphatically not about abandoning market mechanisms. It's important to say that. They remain the most powerful engines for allocating resources and driving innovation that humanity has ever developed.
It's about recalibrating them.
Severely and strategically recalibrating them, yes.
Recalibrating them to make sure they're actually serving humanity and society, and not the other way around. But what does that specifically involve based on those global blueprints we looked at?
It means actively fostering a more competitive and a more inclusive economic environment. It means promoting genuine, often aggressive competition, not just talking about it, but actually breaking down the structural barriers and the regulatory moats that have been created by the unchecked scale of big tech and big finance,
And sharing the benefits.
and ensuring that the vast benefits generated by modern innovation are shared more equitably, reversing that narrow capture phenomenon that is stalling our overall productivity.
We have to mend that fractured promise by creating a new social bargain.
We must. And if you look back at the successes of Switzerland, Taiwan, Vietnam, the single most critical requirement for their success was their collective willingness to adapt, to reject ideological rigidity in favor of pragmatic, evidence-based policies that actually work for their unique circumstances and actively manage systemic risk.
So, for you, the listener, we want to leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over. If capitalism 4.0 relies on things like strategic industrial policy, heavy investment in human capital, and decentralized governance to achieve stability and shared prosperity, what is the single most entrenched, rigid ideology in your own country? That one core assumption about how the market or the state must operate that is currently blocking pragmatic solutions? That must be questioned and maybe even dismantled first to begin that necessary economic and social transformation.